racing across the sky at the dawn of the jet age. The F-86 Sabre goes head-to-head with the fierce Soviet MiG-15.
The rivalry between the F-86 and the MiG-15 is one of, if not the most iconic aerial rivalries in air combat history.
With electrifying speed, thrilling agility, and fearless pilots at the command,
the F-86 could snap back and get behind a MiG-15 in the blink of an eye.
Witness one of America's first fighter jets strike with a vengeance.
The F-86 ushered in a new era of fighter.
And show no mercy.
The F-86, in the hands of a skilled fighter pilot, was the deadliest fighter of its time.
The F-86 Sabre is the ultimate lethal weapon. December 1950. 4 American F-86 Sabres dart through Korean airspace in dire need of a victory. 25,000 feet below, communist North Korea has waged war on the South and its United Nations allies for 6 months. Here on the ground, it's hell on earth.
Many Americans are feeling very confident coming out of the end of World War II with a victory, and all of a sudden, they are met with a disastrous defeat at the opening of the Korean War.
Overhead, chaos strikes as North Korea's Soviet comrades unleash MiG-15 jets. Facing them are inferior F-80s and F-84s.
When the first MiG-15s appeared in the battle, the F-80s and the F-84s could not match the MiG-15. The MiG-15 was much faster, could go much higher, and had really good armament on the airplane. Totally outclassed the F-80 and the F-84.
The UN's only other hope is the F-51 Mustang. This piston-engine superstar was a hero in World War II, but it's no match for the MiG.
The F-51 was a great aircraft in World War II, but we've now moved on. Technology has advanced, and compared to this new generation of jets, the F-51 is slow.
Desperate, the U.S. Air Force calls up its newest weapon, the F-86 Sabre jet.
The F-86 was the brand new top-of-the-line fighter. It was seen as the cutting edge. It was the best air superiority fighter that the Americans had to offer.
December 17th. At Kim Po Airfield, ground crews prepare the Sabres for battle with the MiG. Leading the hunt is Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Hinton. Like the entire U.S. Air Force, Hinton is eager to see how the Sabre matches up against its tenacious rival. His F-86s are untested in combat, and he's only taking 4 to the raid. This could be a suicide mission.
There is a lot at stake here for Hinton and his flight. It's sort of a proof of concept. Can the F-86 actually do this in combat?
Deep in North Korean territory, Hinton's strategy is to deceive the MiGs.
For this mission against these MiG-15s, Hinton used the element of surprise by using the call signs of F-80s to make MiGs think that this was a vulnerable group of slower fighters.
Suddenly, the number 2 pilot spots enemy aircraft 7,000 feet below. The trap is set. The MiGs have no idea there are Sabre jets flying high above them. This is the moment. It's time for the Sabre's close-up.
This is the North American F-86 Sabre, the premier fighter in the skies over Korea in the 1950s. Its speed was based on a combination of a powerful axial flow jet engine and a unique and innovative swept wing design, allowing the aircraft to fly at speeds exceeding 650 miles an hour, even exceeding the speed of sound in a dive. Essentially, it was a 6,000-pound thrust engine molded inside an aluminum fuselage. The F-86 was one of the last and greatest race car-style fighters ever built, and it was every pilot's dream to fly.
On Bruce Hinton's mission, speed and altitude are the key to his trap.
Having an altitude advantage is very, very important because you can dive on your opponent, get to your top speed while they're at cruising speed.
The Sabre pilots peel off in pursuit of their targets. Hinton aims for the closest bogey, peppering the MiG as he watches smoke trail from its wing. There's no time for celebration. In the heated dogfight, Hinton strays from his wingman, a dangerous move. To make it home alive, he must finish the MiG solo. The flight leader presses in on his opponent. So close, his Sabre bounces in the MiG's jet wash. If he doesn't aim just right, he'll lose his kill.
Believe it or not, one of the hardest things in aerial gunnery is shooting down another aircraft that you're directly behind, because all of the turbulence off of his airplane is hitting your airplane. So Hinton's trying to pull right up behind this guy and get very close to him and hammer him, and he's getting bounced around.
At 800 feet, Hinton fires a long burst and watches the enemy's tailpipe fill with smoke. But its armor is tough and hard to dismantle. He unloads 1,500 rounds. Finally, the MiG erupts in flames. For the first time, America's state-of-the-art jet has taken out a MiG.
He felt elated, but he kept fighting because they're still in the enemy area, there are still enemy aircraft around, there's still more to do.
In the distance, the other F-86s race after their element. The Sabres fire a passing shot, but it's too late. Their rivals are out of range. As the American pilots watch their targets escape, they see Hinton's MiG plummet in the distance. The Sabre has arrived, and the U.S. Air Force has their first victory with their newest combat assassin.
First air-to-air kill of an F-86 against a MiG-15 is a great moment, not just for Hinton personally, but it also represents that we've entered this new age and this epic rivalry that's going to become so iconic.
2 days later, winter sets in on the battle-scarred Korean Peninsula. This war is about to get ugly. The F-86 and the MiG-15 have a bitter fight ahead.
We were made painfully aware at that point that the Russians were capable of producing a frontline fighter that in many ways was as good as our frontline fighters.
These competing jets have a similar origin. They're two opposing fighters born from the same radical invention, the jet engine.
The invention of the jet engine revolutionized aviation, and it's one of the great technical revolutions in aeronautics in the 20th century. The jet engine was really the product of people thinking outside the box.
The vision of a jet-powered future begins in the 1930s with a British test pilot named Frank Whittle.
Whittle basically realized that the faster you flew, the propeller would be increasingly inefficient.
Propeller planes have speed limits. When these fighters approach the speed of sound, their propeller tips cause drag and start to fall apart under turbulence. In contrast, jets are equipped with engines built for speed. jet engines suck in air, which is mixed with fuel and ignited. The result is a controlled explosion that propels the jet through the air. By 1941, Britain's first jet-engined aircraft, the Gloucester Whittle, takes to the sky. In Germany, the Nazis won't be outdone. They developed their own jet engines, and in 1944, produce a deadly jet fighter, the Messerschmitt 262. This jet has four 30mm cannons and can fly 100 miles per hour faster than the Allies' top propeller fighter, the P-51 Mustang.
When the P-51 pilots first see the Me-262, they can't believe their eyes. The Me-262 jet has a tremendous speed advantage, and in air combat, speed kills.
The P-51s have a desperate fight ahead. It's America's best piston versus the Nazis' lethal jet engine in a battle for the future of air combat. In World War II, Germany's lightning-fast Me-262s terrorized the skies. Their P-51 adversaries need an edge to strike down these revolutionary jets.
One of the P-51 pilots who's shocked by the Me-262 is a very young Chuck Yeager. It's November 1944, and he's flying a mission escorting bombers. On their way home, they see Me-262s.
Yeager attacks. His first tactic, surprise.
Yeager and his wingman try to get behind them to take a shot, but no luck. The Me-262 is just too fast.
Yeager's A strategy fails. Plan B requires nerves of steel.
We commonly think, looking at air warfare, that it's all about shooting down airplanes in the air. But in point of fact, air superiority oftentimes requires that you achieve it by striking the enemy where they live. And so the Allies engaged in what they called rat catching. They actually sent patrols around the German airfields, and they would catch Me-262s on landing or on takeoff.
Yeager spots the jackpot, an Me-262 heading north towards a brand new German airstrip. The Mustang pilot pushes the edge, dodging flak all around. At 400 miles per hour and dropping fast, he hammers the Me-262. As he pitches his aircraft back to the sky, he looks back to see a wing fly off his target and crash into a wooded field.
For Yeager, it's a sweet moment of victory, but the Me-262 points out a much bigger problem. The jet is so much faster that Me-262 pilots will go on to claim over 500 Allied fighters shot down. And the Me-262 also signals the beginning of the end for the piston engine fighter.
Contrary to the war's outcome, the advantages of a jet fighter are now obvious. The Americans are clearly way behind.
The Me-262 pointed out to American pilots they had to make the transition to jet fighters right after the war.
To the victors go the spoils. The Allies quickly seize German aviation research.
Because there's this recognition that the Germans have a lot of technological knowledge and skills and even specific items, there is a mad rush to get as much of it as possible. The British, the Americans are coming in from one side, the Soviets are coming in from the other side to snatch up as much of this technology and expertise as they can.
By 1945, manufacturer North American Aviation has designed a jet with straight wings. The FJ-1 Fury for the U.S. Navy. It can hit max speeds of 547 miles per hour. The Air Force demands 600 miles and above. To close the gap, North American adopts the hallmark of the Me-262, a swept wing.
The critical development, really, that enabled that transition into high-speed flight was really in reducing the span of wings and sweeping those wings back.
As a plane accelerates, air flowing over its wings increases, creating lift. When a straight-winged plane reaches over 600 miles per hour, too much concentrated airflow creates a shock wave, reducing lift, making the plane unstable. Swept wings divide airflow in two directions. Air now moves perpendicular to the wing and horizontally along its leading edge. Dividing airflow delays the formation of a shock wave and allows the plane to travel at a much higher speed without becoming unstable. North American Aviation sweeps their jet's wings back to a 35-degree angle, revolutionizing flight in America. With the aerodynamics resolved, the company puts their prototype to the air. In 1947, they marry the General Electric J-35C3 engine to a tough, rugged fuselage. Their groundbreaking experimental jet is the XP-86. A year later, its combat-ready model, the F-86A, shatters the world speed record, hitting 670 miles per hour.
North American built the best fighter of World War II, the Mustang. So North American knew what it meant to build the premier fighter, and they wanted to do it again.
With every breakthrough comes risk, and piloting a brand new aircraft in the jet age is extremely dangerous.
Don't forget, America's leading ace of World War II, Richard Bong, was killed testing jet aircraft. So with these new jets, the airframe, the engines, the swept wing design, they're about to push way past what these piston engine pilots have ever experienced.
As the Cold War heats up, America rushes to get ahead. On the other side of the world, the Soviets race for the same advantage. In 1946, the Soviet Air Force buys 25 Nene jet engines from Rolls-Royce, then copies and refines them into the Soviet RD-45F. Powered by this monster engine, the Mikoyan Garovich Aircraft Company designs its own wonder machine, the MiG-15. Its chief design purpose: intercept and destroy B-29 Superfortress bombers.
Air-to-air combat is interesting. It's fast, it's exciting, but it's not how you win or lose wars necessarily. The real work of air power is bombing targets on the ground, and that's what the Americans are trying to do. The F-86s are there to make sure those bombers get where they need to go. The MiGs are trying to interrupt that through any means that they can.
Spring 1951. The air war heats up over Korea. 4 months ago, the F-86 claimed its first MiG-15. But the Soviet jet is a fierce opponent. The United Nations and the Communists battle in a gritty duel for air superiority. The MiG relies on its powerful armament, 2 23mm cannons and 1 heavy 37mm cannon.
To be successful, a MiG doesn't have to get an air-to-air kill. They don't have to shoot down a Sabre. All they have to do is prevent that bomber from getting to its target or dropping its bombs accurately.
April 12th. 46 Superfortresses target the Yalu River Bridge, connecting China and North Korea. Out of the blue, waves of MiG-15s dive on the bombers. The MiGs shoot down 3 and badly damage 7 others. It's dubbed Black Thursday.
Ideally, the F-86s can provide that protection and let the B-29s get to where they need to go. It's when that system breaks down that it becomes terrifying for a B-29 crew.
The U.S. Air Force has less than 90 Sabres in the Far East. They're outnumbered nearly 5 to 1.
If the Air Force wants air superiority over Korea, they need more F-86 Sabre jets, and they need them fast.
The air war is at stake. The U.S. must produce more Sabres or face potential defeat over the Korean Peninsula. 1951. In the skies over Korea, American Sabre jets are vastly outnumbered by the deadly MiG-15. By summer, the American Air Force finally heeds the call. New upgraded F-86Es arrive on the Korean Peninsula.
The F-86E introduces the all-moving tail. It allows for greatly increased controllability and stability at those extremely high speeds. The other big change with the E model is a drastically different control system with hydraulic-powered controls throughout the entire aircraft. It lets pilots have greater control, greater response, and just a slightly faster response time in those flight controls when the pilot moves their stick around.
The jets are joined by another new arrival, a select batch of World War II veterans, ready-made for action. One is Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski. During World War II, he scored 28 victories in his P-47 Thunderbolt, making him one of the leading aces of the war.
After World War II, he actually got out of the Air Force, and then they kept trying to get him back. You know, then the Korean War broke out, and they were looking for volunteers for it. And so he never told my mother or anybody else, but he, you know, all of a sudden he volunteered for it, and he kind of said, okay, this is what I do.
Despite experience, even World War II veterans have doubts when it comes to a new plane and a new theater of war. July 8, 1951. 15,000 feet. Gabby Gabreski flies lead element in Korea. He's in an unfamiliar olive green G-suit, flying in a foreign world. Today's mission? Lend cover to F-80s, strafing ground targets around Pyongyang. As Gabreski watches bombers smash a rail yard below, concerns run through his mind.
His questions were things like, did he have still the fire in his belly? You know, was his reactions, were good enough? And were his eyes good enough? You know, you have to have quick reactions, and you have to have a situational awareness. You have to be willing to take the fight to the enemy. And those three things are critical to a fighter pilot.
As Gabreski's formation turns north towards China, his thoughts are interrupted when he spots a very different scene. 5,000 feet beneath the Sabres, MiGs and F-80s mix it up in a furious dogfight. Gabreski spots a MiG break away from the bunch, an opportunity too good to miss.
He immediately went down to join the fight. He was engaged for the very first time with the enemy aircraft. He flew right up in his tail, he got close.
He waits until he can see the MiG's tailpipe in his windshield and fires from just 300 yards behind. 50 caliber rounds slam into the MiG's fuselage and wings. But Gabreski wants to make sure it's finished. He turns hard for another run, his G-suit squeezing his body, keeping blood from rushing away from his head. The ace fires another burst. This time, the MiG erupts in flames and rolls toward Pyongyang. Colonel Gabreski still has it.
As a pilot, he probably felt vindicated. He probably felt like this was good for him because he had proven to himself that he was able to fly and to fight and to be the leader that he wanted to be.
His questions are answered at just the right time. The young pilots in Korea need a leader, and he's just the man for the job.
The young pilots came in green. My dad fired his guns for the first time in his first combat sortie.
Terry's father is Alonzo Walter, a second lieutenant in Gabreski's wing.
They could look at a guy like Colonel Gabreski. He led by example, and so they knew he wasn't asking them to do anything he wasn't going to do himself, and they knew they were going to learn just a heck of a lot from him.
Walter has a critical job, flying wingman to the experienced World War II veterans.
A wingman has your back. Guy coming up on your sixth, your wingman is going to make sure that either that guy gets taken out or you're going to get out of that guy's way.
Experience, teamwork, and the right technical advantages. It's just the right combination to give U.S. forces the leading edge in Korea.
The F-86 had a very advanced gun sight for its time. It was a radar-ranging, gyro-stabilized, automatic lead computing gun sight where there was a radar in the nose, and it would allow the pilot to accurately determine the range of its target. So the pilot would literally put a dot called a pipper on the target. He would pull the trigger, and that would automatically guarantee that the bullets would converge about a proper distance.
When the bullets successfully converge, the destruction is lethal.
The F-86 was equipped with 6 Browning M3 50 caliber machine guns, with each machine gun capable of firing 1,250 rounds per minute. When all 6 machine guns were firing, that's equivalent to about 125 bullets per second. It's truly incredible.
U.S. forces were once chased by the MiGs. Now, F-86 pilots lead the chase with another batch of new Sabres. In November 1951, the U.S. Air Force converts the 51st Fighter Wing from F-80s to F-86s. Colonel Gabreski takes command.
He could see the whole picture. That's what kind of set him apart from everybody else.
Gentlemen, I wish to welcome you to the 51st Fighter Interceptor Wing in Korea. While you are here, and in a very short period of time, I think, you will realize why the Fighting 51st has compiled one of the best combat records in the history of the United States Air Force.
In enemy airspace, the opposite movement is underway. The Soviet Union pulls its best veterans from the fight and trains novice Korean pilots in their stead. It's the perfect storm for U.S. forces. American pilots race to lure inexperienced opponents into MiG Alley, a large strip of land that runs along the Yalu River, forming the border with China.
The MiGs tended to like to congregate there because if they got into any trouble, they could scurry right back across the Yalu and not have to worry about anybody following them, since our pilots couldn't follow them there.
There are standing orders to not cross the Yalu River and make attacks in Chinese airspace. The last thing the United States wants to do is provoke a more direct war with China. However, many pilots ignored this rule and crossed the Yalu River anyway in their hunt for MiGs.
A few of those young pilots have the right stuff. Future astronauts Gus Grissom, John Glenn, and Buzz Aldrin. May 14th, 1953, MiG Alley. Aldrin is on a mission to claim his first MiG.
In 1953, Second Lieutenant Buzz Aldrin, United States Air Force, is just another young flyer eager to get into combat and prove his mettle against the old tigers.
On his 37th flight, Aldrin swoops in and out of the clouds and aligns a MiG square in his gun sight. This is the moment he's been waiting for. He unloads his ruthless arsenal and finally scores his first victory. His gun camera captures a rare sight, the ejection of a MiG pilot.
What's unique about the Buzz Aldrin gun camera is it shows that human dimension, the costs and the dangers of this type of combat, and it shows that Americans are dominating in the F-86.
Aldrin returns to his airfield, one of the victors of the day. 3 weeks later, he becomes a national name when Life magazine prints his gun camera images. Like many pilots, Aldrin is working to reach ace status.
To become an ace with 5 aerial victories means you're able to outmaneuver, outfly, outthink your enemy, and it means you've got some skill. You differentiate yourself from your peers, and I would say you set an example that they aspire to emulate.
In the 51st Fighter Wing, there's one ace that tops them all. May 18th, 1953. Captain Joe McConnell takes off in his Sabre with a record-breaking 13 victories.
McConnell was a ferocious fighter pilot with a true mastery of the F-86. He could play with a MiG-15 like a cat playing with a mouse.
McConnell has been flying in combat for 8 months. Today is his last day in Korea. It's quiet as McConnell and his wingman Dean Abbott approach MiG Alley. Suddenly, the duo spot a pair of MiGs. McConnell must decide, make it home alive, or risk his life for one more mission.
It's just 2 MiGs. If he can shoot them down quickly, it might not be too dangerous. But McConnell also knows that across the Yalu lie all the MiG bases.
McConnell gambles on a daring final sortie and speeds after the bogies. But just as the Sabres close in for the kill, 28 MiGs ambush the eager Americans. McConnell flies right into a trap. He's at a 14-to-1 disadvantage. Escape looks nearly impossible. Captain Joe McConnell and his wingman Dean Abbott fight for their lives against 28 MiGs. For McConnell, it's just where he wants to be.
He sees a big formation of MiGs. That's just what he wanted. He flies into that formation knowing that some of the MiG-15s will turn and slow down. That means McConnell can catch them.
McConnell brakes hard and flies straight into a MiG formation. Rolling in behind one, he takes it out. Then, on the tail of a second Soviet jet, McConnell rips off another burst and tears it apart. Now, MiGs swarm from all directions. They're attacking so fast and thick, they're in danger of shooting each other down. Remaining calm, McConnell and Abbott miraculously escape the chaotic melee.
McConnell was a great shot. He was cool in combat from all his experience in World War II, and he knew how to employ the right tactics to make the MiG-15s make a mistake so McConnell could line up a clean shot.
The pair outrun the MiGs back across the Korean border. Running on fumes, they barely make it back to base. McConnell adds 3 more MiGs to his name, with 16 confirmed kills. He's a triple ace, and the Korean War's top scorer.
The nature of fighter pilot culture emphasizes competitiveness. For McConnell to end up on top as the top scoring ace is huge, not only personally, but he certainly becomes a role model for others to look up to.
After 3 years of combat, McConnell and his co-pilots finally gain air superiority. In the summer of 1953, a ceasefire officially ends their brutal war in Korea. America's celebrity ace returns home to the California desert. He's met with fanfare and a warm embrace from his wife, Pearl. But in a devastating twist of fate, he's killed a year later in the jet that made him a star.
When the Air Force offers him a chance to become a test pilot, naturally, he leaps at it. But it's a new variant of the F-86 that will end McConnell's life.
McConnell not only survived some of the most harrowing combat of the Korean War, he was extremely successful at it. McConnell's death is just more evidence of how dangerous test piloting really was during this time.
McConnell isn't the last to test the F-86. Another pilot wants to fly the Sabre to the limit and push through the gender barrier.
Jacqueline Cochran was a famous air race pilot, and she'd headed all the women air service pilots for the Army Air Forces in World War II. Jacqueline Cochran was probably the most famous flying female on Earth.
At Rogers Dry Lake in California, Cochran hopes to become the first woman to break the sound barrier. Crewmen watch as she soars through the sky. In the chase plane behind her is Major Chuck Yeager. 6 years ago, he became the first man to fly at the speed of sound.
Even for an experienced pilot like Jackie Cochran, breaking the sound barrier was still dangerous. She's worried about a red out as her blood pressure increases. All the buffeting is really hard on her body, and she's hoping she won't black out or lose her cool and make a mistake in the airplane.
Jackie raises her Sabre to the sky and then screams back toward the desert floor.
Jackie Cochran's getting bounced around up there. She says it's like flying in an explosion.
As Cochran powers into a shallow dive, a thunderous sonic boom announces she's broken the sound barrier.
It's difficult to imagine something until you can see it. And so for Jackie Cochran to push this barrier and make this great achievement as a woman, it served as perhaps an inspiration to several other women watching this who looked at this feat and said, wow, I can do that too.
In the 1950s, the Sabre thrives. Until the Soviets roll out a new MiG to vie for air supremacy.
The MiG-17 was a great improvement over the MiG-15. It handled much better because the wing was redesigned, it was moved forward, it gave a little more leverage. So at higher speeds, the airplane was much more maneuverable. Plus, it had a lot more thrust. It was a lot more powerful than the MiG-15.
The Soviets deploy their fighter around the communist world, including China. Their first targets? Taiwanese nationalists who have broken away from the Chinese mainland. On the defense, America steps in with the F-86 and a secret plan, codenamed Black Magic. In the 1950s, the U.S. Navy tests a revolutionary new weapon, the Sidewinder infrared missile.
If you could maneuver a fighter to the point where it got behind a MiG, the Sidewinder missile could home on the MiG's exhaust and literally enter the exhaust pipe and detonate, which would almost certainly destroy the engine.
So in World War II in Korea, we've got only guns in close at hundreds of feet. Now we've got a Sidewinder missile that goes out to many hundreds of feet, maybe out to as much as 9,000 feet, hugely expanding this area of air warfare.
In 1956 test flights, the Sidewinder proves deadly. 2 years later, it sails for its first test in combat. September 1958, Taiwan Strait. Tensions between communist China and the nationalist government on Taiwan reach breaking point. The United States wants to protect their democratic interests on Taiwan, but won't take direct action against China.
The U.S. has always been reluctant to get involved in politics between the Republic of China and Communist China. So it's a delicate balance of diplomacy. Where we do provide military aid, we provide the aid, but we don't actually provide the people to do the fighting.
The U.S. Navy initiates Operation Black Magic. They deploy their lethal Sidewinder to Taiwan's Air Force and lock them onto the F-86 Sabre. September 24th, 100 MiG-17s stream over the Taiwan Strait. They swarm with confidence, armed with two 23mm cannons and 1,100 pounds of bombs. The MiG-17s are new, fast, and outnumber the Sabres 3-1. Eager to intercept, 32 Taiwanese pilots scrambled to their F-86s.
Here come these MiG-17s at very high altitude and very high speed, right? F-86s are down there, they can't get up to them, right? So when they're 2 or 3 miles apart, F-86s start to turn, right? So that as the MiG-15s come atop, now the F-86s are right under them.
The F-86s desperately aim their Sidewinders.
With their 6,000 or 9,000 foot missile, nose up, acquire, and they all shoot and then dive away.
Shocked by the missile barrage, the MiGs scatter.
They had to spread out, they had to watch, they had to defend themselves, and defending themselves means they're giving up their advantage of altitude and speed. Now the F-86s are in a guns fight with the MiG, which is where they want to be.
The Sabres shoot down 4 MiGs with their Sidewinders and watch the rest flee back to the mainland. With the help of their groundbreaking missile, the F-86 wins the day once again. Taiwan never again faces aerial assault. The F-86 cements its place in aviation history.
If we take a look at the F-86, we're dealing here with basically about 7,000 airplanes that are produced. These airplanes were really the gold standard of their time.
From Canada and the United Kingdom to Japan, Sabres sweep the globe.
Air forces all over the world flew it. It was an incredibly popular airplane. The reason it was an incredibly popular airplane was it was a joy to fly.
Like an old warhorse, the Sabre never loses its will to fight. It retires from the U.S. Air Force in 1965, but Allies fly it into the 1990s.
Technologically, the F-86 sort of represents a culmination point from which almost every aircraft has evolved since then. The swept wing, the pressurized cockpit, the speeds at which it flies.
The F-86 influenced Vietnam, it influenced the rest of the Cold War, and it influences the Air Force today because the Air Force still wants that margin of superiority, that air dominance out of its jet fighters.
Fast, fierce, first class. The F-86 Sabre cleared the skies for a jet-powered future.